In our topic on contemporary trends in Christian theology, we first of all define theology. And as Professor Jesse Mugambi traces it, the meaning of theology comes from two Greek nouns, theos and logos. As he rightly argues, the link between these two nouns, theo and logos, may be easily noticed in the first chapters of the Gospel of John, where it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God." Mugambi's definition of theology is a systematic discourse about God, a discourse which can be expressed contextually in Europe, in Africa, or elsewhere, is certainly a very befitting definition of theology. In other words, there must be something systematic, something deliberate, something organized about God. If you put it in a simple way, you can say theology is a study of the Word of God, or God and creation, God and people, God and what happens in the world. Something else, Mugambi contrasts theology and philosophy. Of course, theology comes from a religion which is more to do with beliefs, to do with the faiths, and philosophy is about reasoning. In other words, when you study theology, and when you study philosophy and religion, you become a theologian. But Mugambi goes on to contrast theology and philosophy, where he argues that theology presupposes revelation and belief in absolute truth as the last justification for all explanations, while philosophy presupposes human reason as a fundamental court of appeal in the explanation of mysteries and paradoxes. The reason may be used, or reason may be used in theology or in religion to explain some aspects of religious belief. But when reason fails to offer a convincing explanation, a theologian may conclude that God knows, or it is the will of God. In a similar situation, a philosopher would simply conclude that he or she does not know, or simply admits that no answer is available now. For him, theology implies that we start from a given truth to one's theological articulation, which will serve to interpret, elucidate, or unveil. On the other hand, philosophy starts with presuppositions and thereby seeks to help us to find out what truth is, so that truth is not the starting point, but the aim. Now, these views agrees with one philosopher from Europe by name Lubizek, who in his analysis of existentialism philosophy argues that reason is not absolute but limited, and that belief in absolute reason is unreasonable. Now, this calls us to find ways of thinking that can assist with day-to-day problems. Now, something great is that Jesse Mugambi has offered a critical definition of theology, where he says it is a systematic articulation of human response to revelation within a particular situation and context. And of course, this classical definition is loaded and can be expanded in a whole book, as it contains several important implications. Among these are that theology must not be associated with literacy or high academic learning, even though such skills may greatly enhance theological expression. In other words, we are saying that theology, particularly in the Western world, has been associated with the scholars who are writing in the libraries, who are publishing books, who are systematizing things through correlation, elucidation, doubting, and using methods of philosophy in the libraries. But our understanding as we try to look at contemporary theologies is that theology must not necessarily be written. Theology must not necessarily be done by an expert scholar, though being an expert scholar is an enhanced way, or is a big plus in that. Rather, theology has to be associated with systematic reflection and articulation. So if you look at African religion, for example, the so-called African indigenous religion, the Western scholars have dismissed it as having no theology. But that is not true, because there is listening. There is dialogue to do with the beliefs and the faiths of the people of Africa, even before the coming of Islam and Christianity. So they were theologizing because they were reasoning out those beliefs. So it's not, even gospel musicians, they are not trained theologians, but they theologize at a particular level. It may not be the highest level possible, but they do some theologizing even as they release their gospel music. Of course, they need more advanced theological training so that they are more classical, more informed, but they do it at a certain level. That's why John Beatty says there are 3 types of theologies in Africa. There is the so-called written theology, mainly for the scholars like him and I and other people. There is also oral theology for those who are singing, who are not writing. That's oral. Those who are just speaking it, not writing it, and those who are not necessarily educated. So written theology is for the privileged few of Africa, although they are increasing. And oral theology is for the masses. But there is also symbolic theology, where particularly the African indigenous religion relied on these symbolic things, the carvings, the big mountains, the Kilimanjaros, the Mount Kenya. They had symbolic theological implications to the local people. Hence, we need to understand that we don't have a universal theologian, because theology is systematic articulation of human response to revelation within a particular situation and context. The fact that it is particularized and contextualized means you cannot universalize theology. Everybody is theologizing at a particular level, on certain issues, and every people theologize what they have in their contexts and the situation, because even God's revelation is particular, situational, and it is to certain people, certain regions, although there is also universal appeal in the theologizing. But if you look at it critically, you discover that genuine theologians are, to an extent, parochial. There's a sense in which we are parochial if we are theologizing, because a person living in Kenya cannot theologize for Americans properly, though one can do in a very abstract way. He may not have the in-depth of it all. So that is the far this lecture considers as the definition of theology.